All right, everybody. Good morning. We're going to just talk a little bit, introduce everyone, get some housekeeping announcements, and then we will begin. And I guess in the meantime, people will join at their leisure. They have the passcode so they can come in. I don't need to let them in. So welcome. My name is Noel Roberts, founder of ZHL Consulting, also the developer of Remind Assessments. It's been about 40 years for me in the field, supporting students, upskilling teachers, and educating parents. So yes, I am an old man, but still kicking, still living, still trying to help others. And I guess I'm pretty much in legacy mode at this point. So yeah, moving right along. We have wonderful speakers here today, all together, putting it all together as the topic says. Our first workshop was done by Scott Andrew Campbell. He gave his personal journey. Scott is an experienced entrepreneur with years of industry experience and is a professional educator. Operating a high-tech consultancy firm for 8 years, Scott went on to develop and patent the world's first 3D reflex microlens imaging technology. Since then, Scott has been working as a licensed educator and has mainly focused on technology in education. In addition to his work in the field of education, Scott hosts numerous free workshops, advocates for students' special needs, and also shares his industry expertise to help schools develop more authentic STEM programs. As an individual, with special education needs himself, Scott is uniquely qualified to talk about special education from both the perspective of a scholar, a parent, and as a teacher. He's also a great friend of mine. Maybe Agnes is here, who will help us with translation. Maybe Agnes can translate that for a Chinese audience.
Okay. 那么首先呢是一个讲者的介绍。我们第一场工作坊的讲者呢是 Scott Campbell， 然后他的题目是通往读写之路，他的个人旅程。Scott 是一位非常有经验的企业家，他有工业行业内的工作经验，而且也是一位专业的教育工作者。他经营了一家高科技咨询公司8年之久，然后在这8年之内，他独立研发了世界上的第一个3D 反射式微透镜成像技术，并且申请到了专利。然后之后呢 ，Scott 又继续作为一位持证教育工作者，在教育行业内工作，而且主要聚焦于关注科技教育。在教育工作之外呢 ，Scott 还主持了许多的免费工作坊。在这些工作坊当中，他倡导关注学生的特殊教育需求，并且还将他自己的行业内工作经验和其他的学校分享，帮助学校来开发更多更好的 STEM 课程及科学、技术、工程和数学教育课程。作为一个本身自己就有过特殊教育需求的人 ，Scott 在这方面尤其有资质，从一个学者、一个家长，还有一位老师的角度，来和大家一起探讨特殊教育问题。Okay.
Thank you, Agnes. Next, we have Ms. Hilda Mann. Hilda gave us the second workshop, Language Support Strategies, Low-Tech Practices. Ms. Mann has been a speech language pathologist in the United States for nearly 40 years. Being ethnically Chinese, she understands the different demands of Chinese and American cultures and has provided professional guidance to Chinese immigrant families in San Francisco Bay Area. Hilda worked at Keystone Academy in Beijing, China as a language and learning specialist. She provided language and learning support to students who present with various learning needs. Hilda is also a consultant with Remind and ZHL Consulting, and she too has become a wonderful friend and mentor to me. So welcome, Hilda. Agnes?
那第二位讲者呢是 Hilda Mann， 她的演讲主题是语言知识技巧，一些简单的知识技巧。曼小姐呢，她是在语言知识领域在美国有着40年的工作经验。她本身是中国人，于此她了解中国和美国不同文化中的需求，而且呢，她在美国的洛杉矶大湾区已经为许多的中国移民家庭提供了很多专业的支持。Hilda Mann 在 Keystone Academy 的北京的学校也工作过。 他在这里做的是一个语言学习和知识专家。他也对于不同学生的他也针对于有不同学习需求的学生提供不同的语言和学习支持。
Okay, and next, delivering workshop 3 for us, verbal behavior analysis explained, is a longtime friend, Dr. Jeremy Greenberg. Dr. Greenberg worked at the Children's Institute of Hong Kong as a director from 2009 to just recently, 2022. He also worked with the Harbour School as a consultant on its senior management team. In 2010, Dr. Greenberg founded the Hong Kong Association for Behavior Analysis, where he has served as president and other board positions. He's now the founder of Knowledge Network in Hong Kong. And he is a consultant for our company, and he will hopefully participate in our April series of workshops, ABA in Education. So we thank and welcome Dr. Greenberg to our panel discussion today.
第三位讲者是
Go ahead.
第三位讲者是 Jeremy Greenberg， 然后他是自2009年、2022年一直在香港的儿童协会工作，并且是理事。他在香港的 Harbour School 里面做一个咨询师，而且呢还是他们的高级管理团队的成员。在2010年 ，Dr. Greenberg 他自己成立了一个香港行为分析教育协会，然后他是该协会的董事，也是该协会的理事会成员。他现在呢是香港知识教育的这样一个公司的创始人，然后他也是 Mind 的咨询师之一。在4月份，他也会参加我们的 ABA 教育的工作坊项目。那我们欢迎他。
Okay, so just a few announcements before we begin. Speakers should keep their answers between 2 and 3 minutes maximum. Attendees, please keep your mics off or on mute. So how it's going to go is for the first 30 minutes, attendees can type in their questions in the chat box in English or in Chinese, because I'm here and Agnes is here. So we'll get to that and we'll be able to address those questions regardless if you type it in English or Chinese. During the final 30 minutes, we'll open it up. Attendees, if they would like to speak, and we encourage them to do that, they can raise their hand using the reactions to indicate that they want to ask a question in English or Chinese. So they'll unmute their mic and speak when we instruct you, and Agnes will translate if you speak in Chinese, no problem. Myself, the moderator, will ask each workshop speaker to just give 5 or 10 minutes of the summary of the talk that we had over the last 3 weeks. Then I will begin to ask questions and indicate who specifically should answer those questions. Once that person has answered the question, other speakers are welcome to add to that and qualify that in any way that they'd like. And again, please keep it between 2 to 3 minutes. New questions will also be spontaneously drawn from workshop summaries like the ones you're going to give speakers, and the flow of conversation that will happen throughout the panel discussion. I will also possibly answer 1 or 2, but I'll stay out of it as much as I can and let the speakers do their thing. And I may also add a few questions as well. Agnes?
Okay. 接下来呢，我们就简单介绍一下今天的整个流程。首先是每个讲者呢，他们的问题回答时间都限制在2到3分钟范围之内。然后其次，在我们整个工作坊的1个小时里，前30分钟呢，大家可以如果说自己有问题，可以将问题呢，发送到这个聊天框里面。您可以用英文书写，也可以用中文书写，因为中文的话我会翻译。然后在后30分钟呢，大家如果说有什么问题，可以直接和大家连麦，然后直接讲出来。您可以用中文说，也可以用英文说。然后作为这个主持人的 Noel 他自己呢，他会让每一位讲者首先做一个5到10分钟的自己讲话的总结。接着呢，这个主持人呢会帮大家问出大家所 输入到聊天框里的问题，并且呢会告诉讲者到底是谁问的这个问题，那么讲者就可以1对1的进行回答，但是正如刚刚说的，他的回答时间是在2到3分钟。然后新提出的一些问题呢，就是我们后30分钟新提出的一些问题呢，也会最后加入到我们整个工作坊的总结当中，这样大家就可以随时来看到这样的看到我们回答的一些问题，以及最后呢，Noel 可能会自己也提出一些问题或者给出一些回答，但是主要还是让讲者来让大家来提问，让讲者来回答。OK。
All right, without further ado, our first panelist to speak this morning will be Ms. Hilda Mann, and I will stop sharing and give Hilda the floor. Hilda, whenever you're ready, you're on, my dear.
Okay, well, as we all know, language skills are essential to every child's development because those skills enable children to compete in school and life. And there are simple strategies that parents and teachers can utilize to help enhance every student's ability to engage in language-related tasks. And so during the workshop that was on February 11th, we looked at some of the low-tech strategies that can be used to support language performance in the areas of speaking, listening, reading, spelling, and vocabulary. Should I pause to let Agnes translate?
You could, if you'd like, sure.
Agnes, would you like to?
Yes.
Okay.
我们的第一位专家就是刚刚所讲到的 Hilda Mann， 然后他是语言支持方面的专家，然后他讲我们其实在学校和生活当中，很多学生都需要这样的一些语言支持的策略来帮助他们更好的学习、更好的生活。然后在2月11号的工作坊里，我们也介绍了一些方案。然后今天我们要着重讲的呢，就是一些非技术的方案，就是非常容易操作的方案，来帮助来看看孩子在听说读写读绘方面可以怎么发展自己的语言能力。
So most of the practices that we talked about during that particular workshop are those that are easily accessible by parents and teachers and could be used not only in the classroom, but also during everyday settings, such as meal times or shopping or playing games. And the majority of the strategies, if applied consistently by teachers and parents, they could serve as preventative measures in keeping a student from being enrolled in special education. And as our world is becoming more and more visual, I stressed the importance of helping students to create their own visualizations to increase their listening, reading, spelling, and vocabulary skills. Agnes.
我们在那次工作坊提到的大多数策略呢，其实都是不管是老师还是父母都是很容易实践并且获得的。这些教育的策略，它不只是用于教室的场合，老师在我们带领孩子做一些普通的社交活动，比如购物、比如游戏的时候，也是可以采取的。而大多数这样的策略呢，都会预防孩子，避免去不得不去接受特殊教育。因为今天我们是越来越多网络化，那么我也让孩子运用到网络化的这样一些技巧的东西，跟自己的知识学的能力。
Thank you.
Okay. Okay, great. Thank you very much. So the next person is Scott. Scott, are you ready? I think you're having some technical difficulties. If not, we can go to Jeremy.
Yes, thank you, Noel.
Okay.
So my workshop was the first in the series, and in that workshop, I shared my own personal story. As an individual with special educational needs, I was actually diagnosed from a very early age with a severe level of verbal dyspraxia. My speech and language problems were actually so pronounced that originally the school boards were considering sending me to school for deaf children. because I was unable to speak well into junior kindergarten. I'll give Agnes a moment to translate, and then I'll move on.
那么第二个讲者是Scott Campbell，他说在上一次的工作坊当中，他自己讲述了一些自己个人的故事。他本身就是一个有过特殊教育需求的人，在他语言发展的早期呢，他发现他不会说话，然后他的语言和言语功能受到影响，因此他就从普通的学校转到了一个针对于聋人的学校，因为他那个时候不会讲话，然后他通过一些个人故事给大家一些分享。
Fairly early on, I actually had medical diagnoses, and I was actually referred to home care program with a speech and language pathologist, very similar to what Hilda Mann does. And for years, I'd worked with speech and language pathologists and special education and resource teachers within the school system. And I've actually worked through all 3 levels of intervention for SEN. And you can really tell the value of these support systems, the value of these professionals, people like Hilda and Dr. Jeremy and Noel, what the impact that they can have on a child with special educational needs like I am. Because we learn differently. It's not that we can't learn, it's the way that our brain works is quite differently. And it's really important for us both as an individual with special needs, as a parent, as teachers, to understand those differences and look at how we can capitalize on this child's strengths to develop those weaknesses and help them develop a balanced sense of self-esteem.
所以在非常非常早的时候，我就经历了很多的医疗诊断，而且呢，还进行了一些家庭语言治疗的项目。于是，在那个时候起，我就和 Hilda 这样的人一起相处了。多年以来，我一直接受着像 Hilda 这样的语言治疗师和语言支持师的治疗和支持。然后我经历了所有的3个特殊教育语言支持的阶段，在这个阶段当中，我发现了这样的一些语言治疗和支持系统，这样的专家，像 Hilda、像 Noel 这样的人，他们是对我们这样的学生是多么的重要，他们对我们这样的有特殊需求的学生的影响是非常之大的。然后我们要认识到，不是有特殊教育需求不代表孩子的学习能力有问题，而是说他们的学习方式是不一样的。因此，无论是教师还是家长，都需要理解孩子的特殊需求，这样才能够帮助孩子去针对性的提高自己的弱势，来平衡他们的技能。OK。
And then finally, I gave a breakdown of the English language, showing why it can be quite difficult for individuals with special needs and also for ESL students. And that was the gist of that presentation.
Thank you, Scott.
那在这个上次工作坊的最后呢，他还讲述了为什么对于有特殊教育需求的孩子来说，英语学习会如此的困难。好，这就是他上工作坊的全部内容。
Great. So now we'll hear, thank you, Agnes, as well. Now we'll hear from Dr. Greenberg, and he'll give a summary of his talk as well.
Hello. Hello and good morning, everybody, or good evening in Hilda's case. Thank you for being with us and arranging these amazing presentations. I think that to summarize my presentation, and by the way, Noel can provide links to all of our presentations in full sort of movie form. My presentation was coming from sort of an applied behavior analysis special instruction model in terms of how to sort of blaze that path, if you will, to literacy. Maybe I'll just pause there, Agnes, let you catch up. Yeah.
接下来是 Jeremy Greenberg 博士，然后他讲，他说大家早上好。首先非常感谢大家今天早上来参加这样的一个研讨会，并且能够聆听了我们上次的工作坊。如果说要我来工 工作坊的内容的话呢，我想Noel那边有视频的链接，然后大家可以去回放视频来看看我们上次工作坊的内容。然后我上次主要讲的就是应用行为分析以及一些指导模型。然后今天呢，我们就可以一起来探讨这样的通往读写之路这样一个话题。
So we hear a lot these days about diversity and why that's important. And it sounds right and it feels good, but more importantly, I think the reason why we need to have diversity in all kinds of situations is because we bring our unique perspectives for problem solving. The world has many, many problems right now. I'm sure we can all agree on that. And so we bring our different perspectives and experiences which help to solve those problems. In my case, coming from an applied behavior analysis background, we have developed a science based on the work of B.F. Skinner, and more recently, sort of a subfield within applied behavior analysis has emerged, and that's called verbal behavior analysis. And the benefits to verbal behavior analysis for language development is that it's research-based, and we look at the functional aspects of language and also sort of take a different perspective on trying to understand the roles of the speaker and the listener, and trying to understand how to develop protocols that we can use to induce or to teach parts that might be missing. Yeah, so I'll pause there, Agnes, for you. Thank you.
现在今天世界里，我们越来越多的强调多元化的问题，因为我们知道我们的观点是，因为我们喜欢把个人的观点加入到问题的解决当中。这世界是有各种各样更复杂的问题的，然后我相信这一点大家都同意。于是呢，大家都希望能够用自己的观点、用自己的经验来解决这样的问题，而这些都是我们行为分析、应用行为分析的一些研究内容。然后我的专业里应用行为分析，但是近年来我还有另外一个分支，就是语言行为分析。语言行为分析是一项基于研究的科学分支，然后它更加专注于研究语言的功能，而且呢，我们会在语言行为分析当中呢，我们会聚焦各种不同的观点来看听者的实物的，来研究如何通过一些渠道来，介绍一些不同的东西来怎么在教育当中弥补上一些所缺失的
Lastly, I'll just add that verbal behavior analysis in particular is concerned with environmental interventions. And what we do is identify relationships between the environment and the behavior. This goal enables behavior analysts to provide effective teaching interventions using individualized tactics, which is important, and also to manage faulty or problematic verbal behavior. And lastly, to replace missing verbal capabilities. So if a child is not listening in a consistent manner, we have some interventions that can be very instrumental in helping them learn to listen better. And that's really a great starting point, because when a child can listen in a consistent manner, everything else gets that much more easy to teach. Yeah.
最后我想说的是，语言行为分析呢，它和环境干预是非常有关联的。然后我们的研究表明，我们研究的就是环境对于人的语言行为的影响与相互相关系。那做这样一个研究，在我们的教学当中，就能够更好的提供一些个人化的指导，因为每个环境是不一样的。然后我们还有一些问题导向的，还有一些动物导向的研究。在这些研究当中呢，我们聚焦于一些它不能够 那孩子们其实是非常重要的这个关键的问题。孩子跟你讲了，通过这个指导仪式让他去听话了，那这就是一个非常好的开始。只要孩子开始听懂你所说的话了，那一切的教育都会对你有关系。
Okay, Jeremy, are you done?
Yes, I think that's a sufficient summary of my presentation. Yes, thank
Okay.
you.
Okay, great. Thank you. So now we're going to get into the answering of questions and the discussion part of this. Agnes, now, since you started translating for everybody, the panel is going to be a little bit different than what we normally do. If there's anyone I know who can do this, it's you. So would you be willing to kind of get in there with us and translate the questions and answers as well?
Of course, as long as you need.
All right. Okay. So first question will go to Hilda. It's for Hilda Mann, Miss Mann. This question, Hilda, is, I don't speak English. So how can I help my child develop better language and literacy skills?
So it doesn't, oh, go ahead.
Thank you. 第一个问题是对 Hilda Mann 提出的，他说我不说英语，那我如何能够帮助孩子提升自己的语言和学习技能？
Agnes, your microphone is a little fuzzy. I don't know why.
Can you hear me right now?
We can hear you, but you're a little bit garbly.
Yeah.
Okay, I'll try. Thank you. You can continue speaking.
Okay.
Okay. So I get that question a lot from parents who really want to help their children improve the English skills, but yet the parents don't speak English very well and they don't know how they can help. The simple answer is talk to your child in the language that you're strongest in. If you speak Chinese, then talk to your child in Chinese, because what we want to do is provide them with good language models. If you try to talk to your child in English, but your English skills are limited, then you're not going to be able to give your child the good language models, the sophisticated vocabulary, and just richness of language. You'll be stifled, and then their learning of language would be stifled. So if you talk to your child in the language that you're strong in, then you will then expose them to the richness of your experience, of your language, your knowledge. And then what happens is they develop that knowledge in what we in the field call underlying language proficiency. And so what happens is when the child learns English, then they can access this knowledge in that foundation, in the knowledge that he has stored in the deeper levels of knowledge. Maybe I can give an example. For example, if you talk to your child about Chinese mythology, let's say, then what will happen is your child will have an understanding of gods and maybe creation and things like that. So then when your child goes to school and learns about Greek or Roman mythology, they'll be able to access that information that you expose them to help them learn the new information.
Very good. And actually, to add to that, this is why many schools put in what we call the mother tongue program, because you still need to be able to keep that mother tongue continuing to be developed as you go along. And also just a bit of research out of, this was a Korean researcher that mentions that if a child stays in EAL for longer than 2 years, what begins to happen is that there's a diminishing returns in both the mother tongue and in English. So there are lots of research now about all of that. So thank you, Hilda, for that question. Anybody else wants to add to that? Okay. The next question I'd ask is Scott. My child is struggling in school, but I'm still not sure if I'm getting an assessment. If getting an assessment is the right decision for my child at this time? And so I think this is a question, Scott, that you're uniquely positioned to answer as well. Thank you, Hilda. Scott, are you there?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, can be a very difficult. Yes, can you hear me?
Yes. Yes.
Okay. So this one can be a difficult one because it's not necessarily just about the needs, but also culture and trying to weigh those different issues. And particularly within China, there is a lot of kind of fear about doing that because we don't really have a lot of experience with the special education system in the same way as we've had in the West. So people are still quite unsure. But from my own experience, I would definitely recommend it because an assessment is not a label. Instead, what it is a tool. And it's a tool that's going to help you understand your child's needs. It's going to help the teachers understand what the child needs as well. That way we can get the necessary support mechanisms in place to help that child succeed. And that's the purpose of these assessments. It's not to say this child is unintelligent or that they are there's something wrong with them, but it's taking a look at what can we do to help them? What can we do to help them reach their full potential? So we need to think about them in the correct mindset. And I can vouch that, if I did not have that assessment, those language issues would have never been addressed for me. I would have fell further and further behind in school, and I would not have become the person that I am today. So looking back at the experience, yes, it was emotionally hard for me as a child, saying I'm different. But now that I know why I'm different and how how I learn, I really view that assessment as a tool that has empowered me. It empowered my parents. It empowered my teachers. And that's what those assessments are really there for, is to empower you and to support you in any way possible.
Thank you, Scott. Actually, I forgot to have Agnes translate for Hilda. Sorry about that, Hilda. Agnes, can you translate for Scott what he just said?
Yes. 那第二个问题是问的，如果我的孩子在学校他已经落后了，那我是不是要为孩子争取到是不是要让孩子去接受评估，以及什么样的时间是让孩子接受评估的正确时机呢？这个问题针对于这个问题 ，Scott 的回答是，我知道这个问题呢，对于中国来讲，这个问题的难点在于，就不仅就要考虑我们的需求，还要考虑一个文化问题。在中国，我们对于整个心理评估和知识性治疗都是有一种恐惧和危险在的。然后但是对于他个人的经验来讲，他觉得这是完全可以去做评估的，只要你有担忧，你就去做。因为评估和心理测评它不是一个贴在某个人身上的标签，而是一个工具，它可以帮助教师和父母更加了解孩子的需求，能够去根据这些需求建立一个知识性系统来帮助孩子的成长和学习。因为孩子一旦出现学习上的问题，这不是代表他不够聪明或者他有什么问题，而是我们应该去了解背后的原因，知道什么样的方式可以帮助到他。不管是在什么样的文化里，我觉得我们应该对于评估都要树立起一个正确的思维。如果拿我的例子来看，我如果当时没有接受评估和语言支持治疗，那么我的语言发展能力可能就没有这么好，而且我在学校的学习可能就落后了，我也不会是今天这个样子。所以往回看我的故事，我有很多自己的情感和自己的难处在，因为那个时候呢，我不知道是什么让我如此的不同， 但在接受了评估之后，在接受了原知识治疗之后，我理解到为什么我会不同，以及我该如何学习了。这样的一个评估，它不仅帮助我获得了心理上的能力，而且呢，能够帮助我的老师和我的父母获得了能力。那我相信评估也一定会为你的孩子带来更多的能量和好处。Thank you.
Thank you, Agnes. And I see here, thank you, Scott. I see here that there's a question for Dr. Greenberg. Agnes, would you translate that for the audience?
Is it the question in the chat box?
Yes, it is, by Krista.
Krista, oh, I'm sorry, I can't see it.
Okay, I'll read it. I'd like to ask Dr. Greenberg about the environment and behavior. My living environment is kind of noisy. I myself often feel exhausted and nowhere to escape. My daughter is sometimes absent-minded. Do you have any good way to train our inner mind to find the peace and become more focused on what we are supposed to do? That's for you, Jeremy.
Okay. So it sounds like this is a situation in a home apartment, and perhaps we're trying to get some homework done in that type of an environment, and maybe there is are other family members at home, and sometimes we don't live in places where there are many rooms, so it's easy to have distractions. Well, we like to think of attention span as like a muscle, which can be developed. If you were to go to the gym, you wouldn't go to the to start lifting weights. You wouldn't go to the heaviest end of the weight rack and start there, because you probably couldn't lift it or you injure yourself. So we start small and gradually try to she's saying our apartment faces Main Street, too many cars. Okay, well, it's you might want to consider some soundproofing maybe, but again, I think that attention span, you might not be able to move, you might not be able to do anything about the noisy situation, but if you're working or trying to do homework in short time periods, you might be able to overcome that and teach your child to pay attention for short periods of time, and then maybe take a break for a minute or two. Perhaps wearing headphones, noise canceling headphones might be another option as well. But I think that maybe alternating between maybe like 10 or 15-minute intervals of work time and maybe 5 minutes or so of off time could allow for that sort of appropriate pace and appropriate space to be able to work a little bit more comfortably. Perhaps you might want to consider that. Yeah.
Agnes?
Yeah. 那这个问题问的就是我所居住的家庭环境有一些嘈杂，那孩子很多时候做事情就会分心，好像很多时候都会出神。那如何有什么样的方法可以来锻炼孩子的注意力，让孩子内心保持平静，并且保持专注呢？那 Jeremy Greenberg 对此问题的回答是，这个家庭环境可能是家里有很多人走动啊，或者什么的比较嘈杂，但孩子可能要做作业，那这个问题就在这里。所以孩子容易分心。那关于注意力呢，注意力就像是一个肌肉一样，它是可以锻炼的。比如说，你如果到健身房去锻炼自己的肌肉，你不可能一去就去举最重的哑铃。 所以呢，我们一切都是从小开始，一步一步的往上加，一步一步的锻炼。对于孩子的学习来说，他的注意力也是可以训练的。那有一些师生有一些老师他可以采取这样的技巧，比如让孩子先短时间的保持注意，然后慢慢的让孩子长时间的保持注意。但是如果环境太嘈杂的话呢，也可以借助一些像耳机这样的工具。我所建议的一个工作的一个学习和工作专注的节奏呢是10到15分钟的专注工作时间，然后再给到5分钟的休息时间。这样的工作节奏呢，可以让孩子保持一个比较好的专注度。Thank you.
Okay, Scott? Thank you, Jeremy. Scott, you had something to add?
Yeah, I also wanted to kind of build on and link some of the ideas that Dr. Jeremy has talked about, and also some of the ideas that Hilda talked about in her presentation. Particularly with parents, sometimes you feel overwhelmed, you feel stressed, and I think it's important to also take a moment that despite there's going to be high days and low days, the amazing job that parents do. And sometimes it's hard to recognize that because it takes years for you to see kind of the outcomes of your hard work. So try not to be overly critical on yourself. Recognize that there's always going to be these days that seem stressful, but your role in your child's life is incredibly important. But there's so many simple things that you can do as well. And one of the things that Hilda mentioned was just going grocery shopping with your children. And one of the things that my mother did a lot with me as a child was she would take me on long walks into the forest, separate me from the distractions of the city, separate me from the TV, separate me from all these things that we would get obsessed about, iPads, phones. And that's a great way of just being able to let your mind calm down and separate yourself from technology. And by doing these very simple things, just like taking a walk in the park or just sitting down and having a cup of tea on a mountain or a temple, because there's lots of those in China, you start training and conditioning your mind to start ignoring those distractions that we tend to get obsessed about. And it makes it a little bit easier when you come back to the apartment, back to the city, to be able to separate yourself and say, you know what, I'm going to leave that cell phone on the side, because you've kind of trained your body to be able to go without it during these long, quiet walks away from things. And that's something simple that you can do, and it builds a great bond between parents and child. And I think those types of environmental factors, I know for me, the time I spent with my mom just doing simple things was probably the most influential in my development.
Okay, thank you. Agnes?
Scott 想补充的一点是，他延伸一下Greenberg 和 Hilda 讲的一些事情，讲的一些观点，就是对于父母来说，他希望父母们不要对所有自己面对的一些压力和困难太过于苛刻，太过于焦急了，因为父母的角色对于孩子来讲是至关重要的。其实有很多简单的事情可以让父母和孩子之间保持一个平静的心态，保持一个良好的亲子关系。比如对于他自己来讲呢，他小的时候，母亲就会带他去森林里散步，散很长时间。那这样一个散步的活动呢，帮助他离开了这样城市的喧嚣，还有帮助他避免了电视啊，还有我们所沉迷的一些手机的影响。在这样的一个散步当中呢，我们的内心可以真正的沉静下来，远离了科技的打扰。而对于我们的父母来说，也有很多类似的简单的事情可以做到，比如您可以和孩子一起去超市购物，一起去喝杯茶，去山上坐一坐，走一走。所有的这些简单的活动，其实也可以去训练孩子的注意力，去让孩子的内心保持平静，去排除外界的干扰。这一切都会让等我们这个活动结束之后，孩子再回到家里来，再回到城市当中，他的注意力可能要更好集中一点。 对于我自己的观点来说，是我们长时间的做一件没有技术打扰、没有纷扰的事情，不仅仅可以帮助我们锻炼自己的注意力，排除一些其他的分心的事物，它还可以帮助我们保持一个良好的亲子关系。谢谢。
Okay, great. I'd like to just add a little bit on that too before I ask Hilda the next question. I remember living in New York City, and one of my first apartments was right next to the elevated train, and it was so close you could almost reach out and touch the train as it turned and went down into the tunnel. And for the first 3 months, I couldn't sleep. But then after a while, I slept like a baby. And I remember when I actually eventually moved from that apartment to somewhere much more quiet, I couldn't sleep because there was no train. So my body and my mind had gotten used to hearing that train at night. And I knew, my body knew what that noise was, and I slept like a baby. When that sound was not there, I was alerted, right? And then it took me time to get used to that as well. So, getting used to your environment has a lot to do with that. And another suggestion too is that you don't need to always do homework at home. In fact, in China, I've seen, she must have been grade 3, on the back of an electric bike. Her mom picked her up from school and she was on the way home, I guess, and she was doing her homework on the back of the bike while her mom was riding the bike. But I don't suggest that, actually. But the point is that you can go to a library, you can go to a Starbucks or a coffee shop, not necessarily sitting inside. If it's good weather, you can sit outside at the table, have her do her homework there. So there are lots of places in China where you can sit and be quiet with her, and you're not distracted by those noises that frustrate you in the home. And plus, you're out of that environment where there has been a history of frustration between you and your daughter. So that helps as well. Agnes?
好，那么我想补充的一点是，他之前在纽约生活的时候呢，他的一个公寓就是刚好住在一个火车轨道的旁边，那他可以清晰的听到每次火车过来的声音，火车什么时候进隧道了。所以在他搬到那里的前3个月是没有办法睡觉的，但是到了后面，他居然拥有了婴儿般的睡眠。然后后面他离开了那个公寓搬到其他地方去，那个地方相对安静了，但他反而睡不着了。这就是因为他的身体和心理已经习惯了当时那样一个嘈杂的状态，因此呢，对于我们的环境，其实我们是有一个习惯的。另外呢，孩子在家里如果说比较嘈杂的话，其实孩子不一定非要在家里做作业。比如举个例子，有一个家庭就是，他妈妈孩子上3年级，然后他妈妈每次骑着自行车去接他回来，然后要骑很长一段时间。那在这个骑车的时间里，孩子就把家庭作业做好了。当然，这个是不建议的，只不过是一个引子，就是我们可以让孩子去图书馆做作业，或者去星巴克做作业，或者去一个咖啡馆，只要是相对比较安静的地方做作业。那我们在这样一个相对安静的环境里，这个专门做作业的氛围里，可能会帮助孩子抵御更多的关于环境的影响。Thank you.
Okay. Thank you, Agnes. Hilda, this is for you. Is there a specific book I can buy or a program I can enroll my child in that will provide the kind of language enrichment that you spoke about in your workshop?
Chinese parents always are looking for the book. They want to buy the book, and then just follow the book like it was a Bible. And I recommend against that because language is dynamic. It happens, as Scott was mentioning earlier, in everyday life, with shopping, going to the mountain, walking in the forest. And so I don't recommend that you look for a book, but I do recommend wordless picture books. I talked about those during my presentation a couple of weeks ago. Those books are magic because it doesn't rely on a specific language. So you can look at the book with your child and the pictures will elicit language from the child, or you can model your own story. But you know, it's wonderful because you can use your own language, whatever language you want. And the other thing about programs is oftentimes they're set. They have like a prescribed program, and it might not be the right program for your child. So it's kind of hard to just say, yes, go and look for this particular program. But if you need to get assessment, I'm just going to put a little plug in for our agency here. We do assessments, and you can get tested with ZHL Consulting and the Remind team. And then if further treatment is necessary, you can go with one of the specialists and get some help there. But as far as a book, no, I would not recommend any particular book.
Thank you. Agnes?
这个问题是呢，有没有这样一本书或者一些教育项目能够帮助孩子进行一些语言的学习啊，还有一些语言的知识 ？Hilda 的回答是，我们的中国父母好像很多时候都喜欢去找这样一本书，这样一个项目，他们可以当做圣经一样，一步一步的跟着来，好像问题就解决了。其实这个做法它是不同意的，不建议的，因为语言学习是一个非常动态的、多元的过程。就像刚刚 Scott 所讲到的一样，其实学习它就在生活当中，普通的日常生活当中，在买东西中，在你们爬山的过程中或怎么样的。所以没有这样一本书可以说你去读它了，你跟着它去做，你们的问题就会迎刃而解。不过在之前几周的一些工作坊中呢，我确实有提到一些图画书，这些图画书其实是非常棒的，因为这些图画书它没有使用一种特定的语言，您可以和孩子一起来阅读，来欣赏这些书。在这些读书的过程当中呢，您可以去用自己的语言来讲这个故事，甚至你可以模仿这些书来讲一些自己的故事。这样的一些过程都是你用语言在潜移默化让孩子学习的过程。另外呢，针对一些特定的项目，教育项目来讲呢，这些教育项目它往往都是已经设置好的，所以它不一定就见得适合您孩子的情况。然后，如果说有项目您觉得特别适合您孩子的话呢，也可以使用。但是呢，要更加了解你孩子呢，你可能需要对孩子做一个专业的评估。然后，如果孩子需要语言方面的专业知识，甚至是需要语言治疗的话呢，我建议还是去找专业的语言知识和治疗的专家，并没有那样一本书可以说照着它做就行了的。谢谢。
Okay, thank you. Also, I just want to mention too that I had the privilege of witnessing Hilda using the Wordless book, and it truly, truly inspired me. So please, if you're ever interested in speech and language assessment, Hilda is the person to go to. Anyway, there is a question here. I was going to ask Jeremy the next question, but I'll ask him this one because this is from Beam. I would like to, well, anyone who would like to answer, but I think maybe Jeremy might want to answer this. I would like to hear some comments on NLP. Yesterday, I read an article on its key theoretical foundations and was shocked as I misregarded this area as glib and, you know, in terms of its success stories. Any comments on that?
Sure. There's a lot of information on teaching and learning and theories and all that. And I suspect that this is a theory, just like you said, it's a theoretical foundation. I would ask whether or not there is data to support any particular applied techniques that have been assessed to maybe remediate any particular learning problems in some population of learners like children. So there are a lot of good theories out there. There are a lot of good models. There are a lot of good approaches, but is there data to support any concrete strategies that has been helpful to help somebody learn something better? That's really the bottom line. So be critical, okay? Be critical. There's a lot out there and it looks good and it sounds good and it's, you know, got fancy fancy marketing and all these kinds of things. But again, be critical
Yes.
and be cautious and look at the data and think about what the treatment maybe has in terms of evidence, and you can sort of assess that. So before you go charging up that hill, be a bit cautious, I would say. You know, that doesn't mean it's not effective. If there isn't data to support a technique, that doesn't mean it's not effective. It just means that we need to really consider whether or not it's worth doing, you know?
Thank you. Agnes?
好，这个问题呢是来自 B 的，他想问的是，前2天他读到了一篇文章，里面介绍了一个自然语言处理的这样一个有理论基础的理论形状的东西。那他想问问 Greenberg， 这样的一个自然语言处理，它这个理论真的可信吗？那 Greenberg 的回答是，我们其实会在那个教学和学习领域有许多的新信息，但是他个人对这个东西是保持怀疑态度的。就像 Bim 所说的，它是一个好像有理论基础的东西，但它是否是一个真的理论呢？然后它的数据在哪里呢？它有哪些应用的技巧是在实践当中证实可以是可行有用的呢？这些都还有待考察。它到底有多深的理论基础？它的模型在哪里？它有哪些技术是可应用的？这些也都是还处在疑问当中。所以我对这个自然语言处理这种东西 NLP 是抱有一个怀疑态度的。可能事实上很多的在这个学习和教学领域有很多的理论，他们可能看起来很棒，听起来不错，很高大上，或者他们可能比较适合营销，会营销的比较火。但是我们一定要保持一个怀疑和谨慎的态度，我们要去看这样的他们所出来的概念，它的数据在哪里，理论在哪里，它的有实践性的治疗的理论又在哪里。我们不是说没有数据这个东西它就不靠谱，只是说没有数据我们必须去怀疑这样做是否值得。
Okay, great. So this last question, we started a little bit late, so if you don't mind, we'll go a few minutes over. This last question is for any one of the speakers. What types of academic interventions are available for students with different needs? And I would love to hear also, in addition to Hilda and Scott, also maybe from Jeremy, if there are any ABA specific interventions that can be useful in the classroom, useful in general classroom environments. But anyone can pick up on that, and feel free to jump in, Hilda, Scott, Jeremy, as you like.
Okay, I guess I can start to answer that. The field, there are many. It really depends on what the issue is within the specific learner. There are literally hundreds of research-based and evidence-based strategies and tactics within the field of applied behavior analysis and other fields that have been documented as effective to remediate all kinds of listening, speaking, reading, and writing issues. These are usually based on positive reinforcement, breaking steps down into smaller bits, and the oldie but goodie teaching to mastery. Teaching to mastery is a cornerstone of all good teaching strategies, I would argue. And again, positive reinforcement, trying to sequence the activities and curriculum in an appropriate manner. And I think too, something that gets kind of overlooked a bit is the motivation factor. Sometimes children need a little bit of like what we call prosthetic reinforcement in order to get through certain activities. So those kinds of reinforcement strategies to help motivate people to do things that are difficult for them, I think can offer a very clear path forward for a lot of learners. Yeah.
Agnes?
这下一个问题呢，就是说什么时候是我们进行学习干预的最佳时机？尤其是他希望听到一些从应用行为分析方面所做出的回答。然后 Scott 对这个问题的回答是，就他提到了一个我们的这个应用行为分析很多是基于一个正向强化来进行的，我们分步骤的去强化孩子在不同时期的学习能力，然后就是可能是我们很多活动的和教学的基础，但我们往往忽略了一个问题，就是动力的问题。如果说我们需要孩子需要强化的正是他所做起来很难的东西，然后我们在如何让他去有动力去做这些很难的事情，这可能是另外一个我们可以去努力的方向。Thank you.
Okay, Agnes or Scott, any thoughts to add?
I'll add a few comments.
Yeah, sorry.
Okay. So I agree with Dr. Greenberg about breaking down the teaching into small steps and teach to mastery. When a student is struggling in the classroom to learn, I always recommend that we look to see why and see where the skills are, and then go back to where they are, where the level is, and then start teaching. And do small steps and sequentially, and then get them caught up with the rest of the class if possible. Now, there are a lot of specialists that work at different schools that can go into the classroom and do what we call push-in. That's kind of an old term, but it's instead of the traditional pulling students out to work on skills, the specialist will go into the classroom to work with the student, and adapting the curriculum and the lesson that's going on that day to the student's level, and maybe not working specifically just with that one student, but maybe in a group where other students are also struggling, and that way the student doesn't feel stigmatized, but they're still getting some extra help. So that's what I have to say.
Agnes?
OK. Hilda 想补充的一点是，他非常赞同 Scott 刚刚所讲的，我们在教学当中，采取一个分步教学的过程，然后逐步的让孩子去更好的学习。对于我来讲，我觉得孩子他在面临学习困难的时候，我更倾向于我们要去问为什么，要去知道他的技能点所在，技能点在哪里，然后我们再回头来看孩子处于一个怎样的学习水平，从而来帮助他学习。我们也要持续不断的分步骤的去对孩子进行教学。我们知道有许多的专家，他们可能在不同的学校里工作，他们会走入教室，给孩子进行一个集中的教育。然后这样的方式呢，其实对于孩子来讲是有好处的，他们可以和这样的一些专家，他可以和孩子一起学习，然后他可以根据孩子的情况来改变课程的内容。那对于而且呢，他是比较了解孩子的他可以根据孩子的学习情况来调整课程内容。但是这样的做法呢，我希望它不是针对于某一个学生的。这样的一些专家老师呢，他可以在 面向整个课程的整个班的孩子进行教学。这样一来呢，就会避免去直接的指导一个学生，会让这个孩子感到自己比较特殊。谢谢。
Okay, great.
I have a few more things to add to that.
Go ahead.
If a student is struggling with spelling, for example, you want to look at the spelling errors and then see what kind of mistakes they're making so that you don't just make the child write every spelling word over and over again, but you want to look to see if they're making mistakes with morphological markers. Then you want to teach morphology to help the spelling. Or if they aren't following spelling rules and they forget to include a vowel, or they use the wrong letters, then you want to teach orthography or teach the spelling rules. So specialists can go into the classroom and analyze what's going on with the student, where the mistakes are happening, and then help the teachers set up a program to help the kid. So that.
Thank you.
然后还想补充的一点是，比如说孩子他在于拼写方面有困难，那么这个专家老师就可以走过去看到底是哪里出了错，犯的是什么类型的错误。比如说他可能是语音方面他自己读错了，然后拼错了，那教师就可以更加着重的去教学语音学。然后比如孩子他可能是漏掉一个元音了，他字母写错了，那教师可能更加倾向于去教拼字学。那这样的一种专家学者呢，他就可以走进教室来对孩子的学习和行为进行分析，明白问题在哪里，从而帮助老师去更好的指导学生。OK。
Okay, thank you. Scott, you wanted to add?
Yeah, so I just wanted to pick up on this idea. Hilda mentioned teach to mastery. And I really want to emphasize that learning is a process and not a race. So if you take my own journey, for example, in kindergarten, I still couldn't speak, where most kids start speaking at 18 months. 6 years old, I'm still struggling. Once we worked with the speech and language pathologist, that language skill started developing, but then my reading and writing was quite far behind. And even into high school, grade 9, I'm still looking at reading picture books, which would be something that we would expect of a student in grade 1. But move on even further. I'm now reading, writing, and publishing engineering texts, which are incredibly high-level academic writing, which even well-educated people would find difficult or confusing at times. So it's not necessarily about how fast we can reach these benchmarks, but looking at supporting the child all the way through and working with them and teaching to mastery. And if we don't master a particular skill, if we move on too quickly with that child, then they just get further and further behind and they get discouraged. And this is something that is really helpful with those special educational resource teachers. In my case, it was pull-outs, where I was pulled out of a class and I worked one-on-one with the CERT in my school. Hilda was talking about push-in, where we push accommodations into the classroom. And there's all these different strategies that are available to schools and teachers. And it's, looking at the advice that professionals like Hilda and Dr. Greenberg and Null can offer. They have all these different ideas and solutions that are evidence-based, as Dr. Greenberg had mentioned. It's very important that we look at evidence-based research. And there's not a one-size-fits-all solution as well. There are things that would work for one child that are not appropriate for a child with different needs. And so even though there might be really good research, it may not be research that's applicable to that child's specific needs. And that's where the expertise of specialists really comes into value, to be incredibly important. So again, I don't offer these educational services. All I can do is advocate on behalf, as someone who's experienced it firsthand. I can talk the value of it and really kind of show why it's so important to reach out to these types of people because every teacher wants the best for every child. They want, people become teachers because they care about children, they love children, they want to see them succeed. And we need the tools to do that. And those assessments are that first step in those tools. And then once we have those assessments, the recommendations in those assessments really help us work with those kids with targeted theories, targeted strategies that are appropriate for the needs of that individual child. I'll probably give Agnes a chance to translate because I've said a lot there.
Okay, thank you.
他非常同意刚刚 Hilda 所讲的，要一直，教学就是要一直教到学生会为止。对于他个人的经历来说呢，当他小的时候，他一开始不会说话，一直到是18个月大，别的孩子都会讲话了，他可能是到6岁才开始讲话。这个情况是，之所以会改变，都是因为他会和那些专业的语言知识和治疗师一起，有这样的一些专业人士来帮他，所以他才提升了自己的写作和阅读的技能。他当时的写作和阅读技能是非常差的，到他6岁的时候，他还是只能读那些1年级的学生所看的图画书，一直到今天呢，他已经可以阅读并且写作一些专业性非常强的工程类的文章了。这对于他来说其实是非常漫长也是非常艰难的一个过程，所以他用自己的例子想告诉大家，我们不要长得太快，而是要一直在这个过程当中持续的支持孩子的发展。如果太快了的话呢，如果是去逼孩子太快，那么孩子可能反而会落后，甚至会失去学习的信心。这也是刚刚 Hilda 所讲的，所以说他提倡在教室里我们要有一个专业的人士去帮助孩子，针对性的采取不同的策略来帮助孩子的学习。而且呢，他所给出的建议对于每个人来讲可能都是不一样的，因为每个人的想法是不一样的。然后正如刚刚 Greenberg 所说的，我们所要相信的内容是有证据支撑的内容。那么这个有证据支撑的内容就是刚刚 Hilda 所讲的，每个孩子都是不一样的，所以尽管研究上可能这个是个非常好的研究，但它不一定适合自己的孩子。所以呢，这个时候专业人士的出现就显得至关重要。他虽然说我自己呢并不是一个有这方面资质的像 Hilda 这样的人，但我其实是有这样的经验，我有这样的代表的，所以我可以替他们去说出专业人士的重要性所在。因为我知道每个老师都希望孩子是成功的，希望孩子是需要去关爱孩子的。然后他们为了达到这样的目标，必定需要一些关键的工具。这个工具呢，就是心理测评和评估。心理测评呢，可以帮助我们更好的去理解孩子，更针对性的采取一些策略来帮助孩子学习。
Okay, great. Thank you. I'd like to take this opportunity to thank our speakers, Hilda, Scott, Jeremy, for this month-long really wonderful resource that you've offered yourself and your expertise to support the parents and teachers who have attended, and even those that didn't attend, they do access and benefit from it via the replay links. Also want to take this time to thank the attendees as well, especially those that have been with us from the very beginning. There are lots more workshops coming down the pike. Most of them free, some of them not free, but if they're not free, they're very affordable. So please stay tuned for those. And last but not least, Agnes was awesome. Wasn't she awesome, folks? She was awesome. Thank you, Agnes, for really zooming in and knocking it out the park, and for your translations. And that's it for today. Anybody else would like to say something or suggest something or ask something or kind of burning desire before we close? Okay.
Thank you, Noel, for arranging this terrific series.
Thank you, Jeremy.
Yes, thank you, Noel. Thank you, Jeremy. I learned a lot, and thank you, Scott.
Thank you, Hilda. I know it's late for you. Thank you for staying up late and bearing with us. You're awesome. And Scott as well for all your work with technically and also your story, which is so inspiring to many, especially you know, I've heard it a few times, and every time I hear it, I learn more. So thank you again. Okay, we're going to close, and thank you again, and we'll post the links shortly. Okay, have a good night, have a good day, everyone. Bye-bye.